The world of Varnies had never seen war like this before. The sky was always red with the smoke of burning metal. Ships fell like broken birds. Towers that once touched the clouds were nothing more than black stone. The sound of battle had become the heartbeat of the land. Every living soul knew that something had changed. They had heard about the humans who came from a faraway planet, a world the stars feared to name. Among those humans was a single soldier who moved like night and vanished like air. They called him Ghost. Ghost never gave his real name. No one had ever seen his face without his black combat mask. He moved alone across the war zones. He never spoke to the enemies. He never begged for mercy. Was the reason entire squads disappeared without a sound. To the armies of Varnies, he was a monster who wore the shape of a man. Was the one people. He was the one who walked where no other soldier dared to go. The royal forces of Varnies feared him more than the fleet itself. Entire divisions were formed just to track this one human. They followed the broken ruins he left behind. They followed the bodies of their best warriors, yet Ghost never stayed in one place. When they thought they had caught him, he was already gone. When they thought they had surrounded him, they found themselves surrounded instead. But the war was not only about weapons and power. Somewhere deep within the royal palace of Varnies, a young woman watched the reports with quiet eyes. Her name was Nira. She was the only daughter of the emperor. She had grown up among gold walls and shining armor. She was trained to lead, to command armies, to speak with strength, but her heart was not made for war. She had seen too many soldiers march away and never return. She had seen the ground drink too much blood. She had once seen Ghost. It happened. 1 year earlier, before Ghost became a name whispered in the dark, an enemy attack had broken the walls of the capital. Fires spread through the streets. Nira had run from her guards, trying to reach a hidden bunker. She was not fast enough. A falling beam of burning metal blocked her path. The heat was too strong. She could not move. And then a shadow appeared. A human soldier carried her out of the fire. He did not speak. He placed her in a safe corner, looked into her eyes, and vanished into the night. That was the first and only time she had seen his face under the flames. Since then, his image lived in her mind like a spark that refused to fade. Now, as the war grew darker, Ghost had become the center of every plan. The High Council of Varnies sat around a black stone table, and her armor shone under the war lights. The leader of the council, Lord Sen, slammed his hand on the map. His voice echoed through the chamber. He said that no war could be won as long as Ghost walked on their soil. Called him a shadow killer. He promised to end him. For that, he created the Ghost Hunt. Dozens of trackers and elite soldiers were chosen. They were armed with the most advanced sensors. They were trained to follow even a single footprint in the dust. They were promised honor if they caught him. But they were also warned. Ghost was not like others. He did not run. He waited. He did not attack with anger. He attacked with silence. Many who went after him never returned. Nura sat in the corner of the council room wearing her silver robe. Her father sat on the throne behind the council. His eyes were old, filled with war and duty. He told Nira that this ghost was a threat not only to their armies, but also to the pride of their people. He said that no outsider could walk freely on their soil. Nira said nothing. Her mind was not on the war. Her mind was on the memory of a soldier carrying her through fire. That night, the hunt began. Across the burning plains, small patrols moved like thin lines of steel. They spread through the ruins of old cities. Broken buildings cast long shadows in the moonlight. The air smelled like ash and metal. One group moved through what was once a great factory. The walls were cracked. The ground was black. The leader of the squad pointed to a mark on the floor. It was a single footprint. It was fresh. Ghost was near. But Ghost had already seen them long before they saw him. He moved above them, silent as smoke, walking through the broken steel beams like a creature born in the dark. His breathing was steady. His heart was calm. He knew their numbers. He knew their weapons. He knew the path they would take. He waited until they entered the center of the building. Then he struck. A sudden flash of movement. One tracker fell without a sound. Another turned too late. Ghost was already behind him. The squad tried to fire but saw nothing but shadows. One by one, they fell. When the last soldier turned to run, Ghost let him go. He wanted someone to carry the fear back. He wanted them to know he was still here. By morning, the report reached the council. Another squad was gone. Their signals vanished at the old factory. Their captain was found alive but trembling, his armor cracked, his mind broken by fear. He kept repeating one word again and again: ghost. Nira walked through the palace garden that morning. It was the only place left untouched by war. Flowers still grew there. Birds still sang. She walked slowly, feeling the cold wind on her face. She thought about the stories of Ghost. To others, he was a killer. To her, he was the man who once carried her away from death. She could not believe he was just a monster. She wanted to understand. She wanted to find the truth. She made a choice. She decided to follow the hunt. She wore a light armor and left the palace with her trusted guard, an old warrior named Dren. Dren had served her since she was a child. He begged her not to go, but Nira was firm. She said she was not going as a princess. She was going as someone who wanted to see the truth with her own eyes. The hunt grew larger in the coming days. More trackers joined. They used flying drones and heat scanners. They placed traps in the ruins. They thought they could cage the shadow. But Ghost moved like a wind through cracks they could not see. At night he walked across their camps without leaving a trace. He listened to their steps, counted their breaths. He studied them like a hunter studies his prey. One night Nira's unit set camp near an old riverbed. The sky was clear. The stars shone like cold fire. Nira sat near the edge of the camp. She watched the water reflect the lights. Dren stood beside her. He told her stories of old wars, but she was not listening. Her eyes kept scanning the dark hills around them. She felt something watching them. She was right. Ghost was standing on a broken pillar above the camp. He watched their movements. His rifle was silent. His mask reflected the starlight. He saw the princess sitting near the fire. He recognized her face. It was the same face he had seen through smoke and fire long ago. For a moment his heart paused. He did not know why she was there. He did not know what she wanted, but he did not attack. He turned away and vanished back into the dark. The next morning, the trackers found nothing. Their scanners picked up no trace. Their traps caught no one. The commander cursed under his breath. Nira remained silent. She had felt his presence. She knew Ghost had been close. She also knew he had chosen not to strike. This made her question everything the council had said about him. Meanwhile, far away, Ghost sat alone inside an old communication tower. The walls were broken, but the roof still stood. He removed his mask for the first time in days. His face was tired but calm. He opened a small metal locket around his neck. Inside it was a small picture of Earth. It was the only piece of home he carried. Ghost was not fighting for power. He was fighting because his team had fallen here. He was the last of them. He had promised to finish the mission and make their deaths mean something. He remembered the night he saved the princess. He had no reason to do it. But when he saw her trapped in the fire, something inside him moved. She had looked at him not with fear, but with something else. That memory had stayed with him. Now she was near again, walking among the hunters who wanted his head. He wondered why. As the sun rose higher, Nira's unit moved toward the old capital ruins. It was said to be the most dangerous zone. Ghost had been seen there many times. The commander ordered everyone to stay close. Dren walked beside Nira. The ground was quiet. Too quiet. Then a soft metallic sound echoed through the ruins. It was a trap being triggered. Everyone raised their weapons. A shadow moved across the top of a wall. It was fast. It was silent. It was him. The soldiers opened fire, but Ghost was already gone. Explosions echoed between the buildings. Dust filled the air. Squads scattered. Ghost struck from the smoke. He moved like water through cracks, always ahead of them, always unseen. But this time, something changed. When Ghost came close to the princess, he stopped. Nira stood in the middle of the ruins. Dust covered her armor. Her breathing was fast but steady. She saw him standing a few steps away. Their eyes met through his black mask. She whispered a single word. She said, "Ghost." He did not reply. Turned and vanished again, but something heavy had settled in the air between them. It was not war. It was something older and stronger. When the squad returned to camp, they were shaken. They had lost 3 soldiers. The commander shouted in anger. Nira said nothing. But in her heart she knew Ghost had spared her again. She began to understand. The council saw him as a threat. The army saw him as a killer. But she saw a man who carried both darkness and light. Ghost stood on a far hill that night. Watching the fires of their camp, the wind touched. The hunt for Ghost grew louder across the world of Varnies. The council had lost patience. They had thrown their strongest units into the ruins. Ships hovered in the night sky, their searchlights cutting through the dark like sharp blades. Every soldier had one target. Every weapon was pointed toward one man. But Ghost still walked through their defenses like smoke through fingers. He did not leave his path. He did not leave his mission. In the capital city, the council gathered in the war chamber again. Lord Sen stood at the head of the table. His voice was hard and sharp. He said the human must be captured alive. He said no one had permission to end him. He wanted Ghost to kneel before the council. He wanted to make an example out of him. Many officers nodded, but they felt fear deep inside. Ghost was not a simple enemy. He had become something larger than war itself. Nira sat at the corner again. Her hands were folded in her lap. She watched the council argue. She heard their plans. They talked about traps and drones. They talked about fire lines and heavy weapons. They talked about closing all exits. But none of them had stood in front of Ghost like she had. None of them had looked into his silent eyes. The Emperor spoke slowly from his high seat. He told the council that the honor of Varnies was at stake. He said the people were beginning to believe Ghost could not be stopped. He said if they failed again, the people would lose faith in the throne. The council agreed to launch a wide hunt. They would use all their forces. They would make the ruins a net, and Ghost would be caught in the center. Nira felt a cold wave inside her heart. She knew the net might not catch him, but it would hurt many soldiers. Ghost would strike back. More lives would be lost. She wanted to stop it, but her voice was weak against the power of the council. When the meeting ended, she walked through the empty halls of the palace alone. Her steps echoed against the stone floor. Her mind was not calm. Outside the city, hundreds of soldiers marched toward the broken lands. They moved in lines, carrying heavy weapons and scanners. Drones floated above them like black birds. Ghost watched from the top of an old tower far away. He saw the lights moving like a river of fire. He knew they were coming for him. But he did not run. He never ran. He began to set his path through the ruins. He prepared every corner like a hunter preparing his ground. For Ghost, the hunt was not about winning. It was about time. He wanted to keep their forces busy while his people far away finished what they had to do. He had no base left. His team was gone. He was the last one. But he still carried their mission in his chest like a burning coal that never went cold. As the hunt drew closer, Nira left the palace again. This time she took no guards. She wore light armor and moved quietly through the lower gates. Only Dren followed her because he refused to leave her side. He told her she was walking into danger. She said she already knew. She said she had to see Ghost again. She wanted to know why he was fighting alone. She wanted to know why he had spared her. The hunters reached the first ruined city by night. The wind was dry. The stars were sharp. Their scanners scanned every shadow. Their trackers placed sensors in the ground. The commander gave orders with a hard voice. He said Ghost could not escape this time. But he did not see the quiet figure watching them from above. Ghost moved through the high skeleton of an old factory. He stepped carefully. His boots made no sound. He knew how to become part of the shadow. He had done this for years. He watched the soldiers place their traps. He memorized the paths of the drones. He knew exactly where to strike. Nira's small unit moved behind the main line. She and Dren stayed hidden in the dark alley of a broken street. She could hear the commander's voice through the radios. She could see the soldiers moving like small lights in the distance. She knew Ghost was somewhere out there. She could feel it in her bones. The attack began just before dawn. A soft blast came from the east side. A patrol disappeared. Another blast came from the west. The soldiers turned, but saw nothing. Drones spun in the air, but their signals were scrambled. A third blast hit a supply truck. Fire spread fast. Panic grew. Ghost was striking again. He moved through their lines like a shadow with a purpose. He used the ruins to move fast. He avoided direct fire. He picked targets with calm. Every move was clean and sharp. The soldiers tried to respond, but they fired at empty air. Their commander shouted orders, but the sound of his voice did not stop the fear building in the ranks. Nira watched from the alley. She saw how fast he moved. He was like wind running through a storm. He could have ended many lives. But she noticed something. He never aimed at the weak. He struck at machines. He struck at weapons. He disabled their strength. She began to understand that Ghost was not trying to wipe them out. He was trying to stop the war from growing. The commander called for air support. 2 ships flew above the ruins. Their lights turned the night bright. But Ghost had already vanished under the ground. He used an old tunnel system from before the war. The ships fired at empty ruins. The sound of explosions shook the earth. Inside the tunnels, Ghost moved with steady steps. He remembered these tunnels well. His team had used them before they fell. He still remembered their voices. He remembered their laughter. He carried those memories like a quiet storm in his chest. He placed small devices along the walls as he walked. The hunt would follow him into the dark, and he would guide them exactly where he wanted. Meanwhile, Nira decided to move away from the squad. Dren tried to stop her, but she walked into the ruins alone. She felt the wind on her face. She felt the silence growing stronger. She knew Ghost was close. At the other end of the tunnel, Ghost climbed out through a broken manhole. He stood on a cracked road. In the distance, he saw Nira walking slowly toward the center of the city. The sun had started to rise. Its red light painted the world like blood and fire. Ghost raised his weapon but did not aim at her. He lowered it. His breathing grew heavy. The first wave of hunters followed Ghost into the tunnels. They did not know they were walking into a trap. The moment they reached the center of the tunnel system, a series of small charges went off. It was not enough to end them, but enough to block their path and cut their signals. Panic spread through their radios. Ghost had split the army in half. The commander above ground shouted for backup, but his voice reached no one. His forces were trapped in pieces. Ghost stood on the rooftop of a broken building and watched their confusion. His mission was going as planned, but his eyes returned to the princess again. She stood in the open with no fear in her face. She was not holding a weapon. She was just standing there as if waiting for him. Nira slowly raised her hand. She did not call his name out loud. She only whispered. She said Ghost like a soft breeze. She did not know if he would hear her. But he did. He jumped down from the rooftop and landed behind the shadow of a wall. He watched her from a few steps away. Dren ran to her side. He shouted that they needed to leave. She did not move. She said if Ghost wanted to end her, he would have done it before. She told Dren to trust her. Dren was afraid, but he stepped back. He kept his hand on his sword but did not attack. Ghost stepped out of the shadow. His mask was black. His armor was scratched but still strong. His eyes behind the mask were sharp and calm. He walked toward her slowly. Nira's heart pounded in her chest, but she did not step back. She looked at him like someone looking at a star in the night. The air between them felt heavy. It carried the sound of burning ships and broken cities. She said she remembered him. She said he had saved her. She asked him why he was fighting alone. Ghost did not answer with words. He tilted his head slightly. His silence was louder than any voice. Behind them, the sound of approaching troops echoed through the streets. The commander had found their signal. Soldiers began to surround the area. Dren shouted that they had to escape. Nira looked at Ghost again. He turned his head toward the sound of the soldiers and then back to her. In that brief moment, something passed between them. A promise. A warning. A silent, understanding Ghost moved first. He grabbed her arm and pulled her into the shadow of the wall. He guided her through a narrow path that only he knew. The soldiers entered the open square but found nothing. The commander shouted in anger. The soldiers spread out, but the two had already vanished. They reached a broken courtyard far away from the camp. Ghost stopped and looked at Nira. She looked at him too. Her breath was fast, but her eyes were steady. She told him she did not want to be his enemy. She told him she wanted to understand. She said she knew he was not a monster. Ghost stood silent. His mask reflected the light of the rising sun. He raised his hand slowly and pointed toward the burning sky. Then he pointed at the ground. His message was simple. The war was destroying everything. Nira understood his meaning even without words. She knew the council would never listen. She knew her people were blinded by pride. But she also knew she could no longer pretend to be just a princess behind the palace walls. She was standing in the same world as Ghost now. She was breathing the same smoke and dust. Dren arrived a few steps behind them. He begged her to return to the palace before the council found out she had left. Ghost did not stop her. He simply faded into the ruins again. One moment he was standing there. The next he was gone. The sun was pale over the city of Varnes. The wind carried the smell of burned metal and dust. The soldiers of the royal army returned to the capital with tired steps and heavy hearts. Their mission had failed again. Ghost had escaped their net like smoke through open fingers. Their commander walked in silence with his head down. The soldiers behind him did not speak. Every man knew the truth. Ghost had made them look weak again. Inside the great hall of the council, the leader sat in a cold line of armor and power. Lord Sen was at the center. His voice was sharp as he spoke to the commander. He shouted that honor had been broken. He said, Ghost was only one man, and yet he moved through their army like a storm. The commander had no answer. He could only lower his head. The emperor watched from his throne with quiet eyes that carried the weight of the empire. The people of Varnes were beginning to whisper in the streets. They said Ghost could not be caught. They said he was not human but a spirit of war. Some said he walked through walls. Some said the wind itself carried him away. The council feared these whispers. If fear grew among their soldiers, the power of the throne would weaken. Nira sat behind the curtain in the hall. She listened to every word. Her hands were cold. Her heart beat fast. She was the only one who had seen Ghost up close. She knew he was not a spirit. He was a man. He fought with skill and silence, but he also carried a soul. He had spared her twice. That was not something a monster would do. The council decided to double the size of the hunt. They would send more soldiers, more machines, more weapons. They would not just catch him. They would crush him until nothing remained. But Nira felt a shadow rise inside her. She knew Ghost would not be caught by numbers. She knew he would fight harder, and more lives would be lost. That night she stood in the palace garden again. The garden was quiet and green. It was the only place that still felt alive. Dren came to her side. He said the council had ordered him to keep her in the palace. He said she should not go out again. She looked at the stars. She said she was not a child anymore. She said she had made her choice. She had seen the truth with her own eyes. She asked Dren if he believed the council was right. Dren was silent for a long time. Then he said the council was powerful but not always right. He said he had served the throne all his life, but war had made him see strange things. He said he did not know what Ghost wanted, but he believed the man had a reason. Nira decided to find Ghost again before the next hunt began. She wanted to speak to him properly. She wanted to know his reason with her own ears, even if he did not speak with words. She left the palace under the cover of darkness with Dren at her side. They moved through empty streets until they reached the ruins beyond the walls. Ghost had returned to the old tower that overlooked the fields. He sat on the cold floor. He cleaned his weapons slowly. The wind moved through the broken windows. He was used to being alone. He did not think anyone would come to this place. But when he looked down, he saw a small light moving through the ruins. He raised his rifle but did not fire. It was the princess again. Nira and Dren entered the tower carefully. The air was heavy. Dren held his weapon but did not point it. Nira walked in front. She saw him standing in the shadow like a part of the building itself. His black armor was marked with old battles. His mask covered his face, but his eyes behind the glass were calm. She stepped closer. She told him she was not here to fight. She said she needed to understand. She said she had seen how he moved in the battle. She had seen how he avoided harming the weak. She asked him why. Ghost did not answer with words. He slowly walked forward and stopped a few steps away from her. He reached into his belt and took out a small locket. He opened it and showed her the picture inside. It was a picture of Earth. The land was green and the sky was blue. She saw mountains, rivers, and forests. She had never seen such a place. Ghost did not say anything, but his eyes told her everything. She understood he was far from his home. She understood he had lost something. She asked him softly if he had a team. He lowered his head a little. That was enough for her to know the answer. They were gone. He was alone now. She told him that the council would not stop hunting him. She told him they were bringing more soldiers. She told him the hunt would soon be bigger than ever before. He looked at her without fear. He was not a man who feared armies, but his silence also said he knew the cost of what was coming. Nira asked him why he had saved her that day a year ago. She asked him why he had carried her through the fire. Ghost was quiet for a long time. Then he turned his head toward the window. He looked at the sky and then back at her. She understood that he had not done it for power or strategy. He had done it because something in him had refused to let her fall. Dren watched them from a few steps away. He could see something in the air between them. It was not war. It was not hatred. It was something quiet and strong. He knew this moment would change everything. Outside the tower, the first units of the royal army were already moving. The council had ordered the next wave to begin at dawn. This time, they had brought machines that could cut through steel. They had brought flying drones with fire cannons. The army moved like a dark river. They did not know the princess was not in the palace. Inside the tower, Nira told Ghost that she did not agree with the council. She said she could not stay silent anymore. She wanted to help him in some way. Ghost shook his head slowly. He did not want to drag her into the fire, but she did not step back. She stood firm in front of him. He reached out and gently placed the locket back into his armor. Then he gave her a small piece of metal from his belt. It was marked with strange letters. She held it in her hand. It was warm from his touch. She understood that it was a sign of trust. Dren said they had to return before the council noticed her absence. Nira nodded, but her heart felt heavier than before. She looked at Ghost one last time. She said she would not forget this moment. He watched her walk away through the ruins. He did not stop her, but a quiet fire had started inside his chest. When Nira returned to the palace, the council was already awake. The emperor stood on the balcony and watched the army march out. Lord Sen reported that the hunt would cover half the ruined lands. He said Ghost had nowhere left to run. Nira stood behind them, her face calm, but her mind was full of storm. Dren told her quietly that the council would not forgive her if they discovered where she had been. She said she did not care. She said the truth was bigger than the throne. As the hunt spread across the land, Ghost prepared himself for what was coming. He moved through tunnels and rooftops, setting traps and roots. He was one man, but he carried the skill of an entire unit. He did not plan to win through power. He planned to control the field. The hunters did not know he had already mapped every corner of the ruins. He had studied their movements for weeks. The moment they stepped in, the land itself would turn against them. When the sun rose, the machines roared. Tanks moved through cracked streets. Drones flew like dark birds above the smoke. Soldiers shouted orders. The commander raised his hand and told them to move forward. Ghost watched from the highest tower. His heartbeat was steady. His eyes were cold, but not empty. He had made his choice long ago. This fight was not about glory. It was about a promise. A promise to his fallen brothers. A promise that their mission would not die. The first explosions began near the east wall. Ghost used his traps to collapse broken buildings behind the marching line. It cut their formation in half. The drones turned, but they found nothing. He moved through the shadows like a silent storm. In the palace, Nira watched the battle on the screens. Her father sat on the throne and gave orders to the council. They spoke like men who believed they controlled everything. But Nira knew they did not understand Ghost. He was not fighting like a common soldier. He was fighting like a ghost tied to the land by purpose. She clenched the piece of metal he had given her. She felt its warmth in her palm. She knew that soon she would have to choose between the throne and the truth. On the battlefield, Ghost faced the full force of the hunt. Yet he moved like a blade, cutting through the dark. He struck their weapons and disappeared. He lured their soldiers into empty traps. The commander grew desperate. He shouted for his men to close in, but Ghost was already gone from every place they searched. When the night came, the army had made no progress. They had lost machines and men. Their morale was broken again. The commander's voice was cracked from shouting. High above, on the tower, Ghost stood under the stars. His mask reflected the moonlight. He looked at the city far away. He knew the council would not give up. He knew they would bring even more power next time. But now he also knew he was not truly alone anymore. The princess had seen him. She had understood his silence. The night after the failed hunt was heavy with silence. The air above the ruined lands smelled of burned metal and smoke. The soldiers who had survived the battle returned to the capital with tired faces and broken armor. Their machines were crushed. Their formations were scattered. Ghost had disappeared once again into the shadows. Inside the council chamber, the mood was dark. Lord Sen slammed his hand on the table. His voice echoed through the room. He said they had given everything. He said the army had outnumbered one man, but had returned in defeat. The commander stood like a stone and accepted every word without defense. The emperor sat on the throne without speaking. His eyes were fixed on the burning map before him. The people of Varnes whispered in every street. They spoke about the soldier who moved like wind and smoke. They called him Ghost, as if he was more legend than man. Children drew his shadow on the walls. Traders repeated stories of how he brought down machines with only his hands. Fear and awe mixed in the air like fire and rain. Nira stood in the hallway outside the council room. She could hear everything. She knew the council wanted to end the fight with force. They would bring heavier weapons. They would use fire from the sky. But she also knew Ghost would not stop. She had seen his eyes. She had felt the weight of his silence. This was not a fight about victory. It was about purpose. Dren walked to her side. He asked her if she was ready for what might come next. She said she was not sure. He told her the council was planning something bigger. He said they might use weapons that would burn the entire ruins. She felt her chest tighten. She knew innocent people still lived in those broken lands. Later that night, Nira stood in the garden again. The stars above were cold and far away. She held the small piece of metal Ghost had given her. She turned it in her hand again and again. It felt warm even in the cold air. She thought of his face behind the mask. She thought of the picture of Earth inside the locket. She thought of the quiet strength he carried. She made a choice. She would not stay silent anymore. She would not let the council burn everything. She would stand between the throne and the storm. The next morning, the city was filled with noise. The council announced that a final operation would begin in 2 days. They called it the Iron Dawn. They said Ghost would be destroyed. They said no stone would be left standing in the ruins. The soldiers cheered because they believed this was the end of the hunt. But the people in the city did not cheer. Many had seen too much already. Some had lost sons and brothers in the last battle. The name Ghost had become a shadow that followed their steps. Nira walked through the halls, stopped outside the emperor's chamber. She asked to speak to her father. The guard stepped aside. She entered and saw him standing near the window. He looked older than before. The crown on his head seemed heavier. She called him father instead of emperor. She told him the council was wrong. She told him Ghost was not the enemy they thought he was. She said he was a man who had lost his home. She said burning the ruins would not end anything. It would only make the flames grow higher. The emperor did not answer at first. He looked at the city below. Then he turned and said the throne was not built on softness. He said he must protect the empire before fear spread like poison. He said if Ghosts live, then the people would start to question the throne. Nira stepped closer. She said the empire could not be saved by burning the innocent. She said power was nothing without honor. She said Ghost had saved her life once. He was not a monster. He was a soldier who had lost everything. Her father's face changed for a moment. His eyes softened. He remembered the night his daughter had been brought home alive because of the man they now hunted. But then the weight of the crown returned to his face. He told her that emotions could not lead the empire. Nira left the room with fire in her chest. She knew her father's heart was not blind, but the council had wrapped him in chains of fear and control. She walked to Dren. She said they would go to the ruins one last time before the Iron Dawn began. Dren did not ask why. He already knew. They moved in the dark with quiet steps. The city was sleeping. The sky was black. They crossed the outer wall and entered the cold ruins. The wind moved through broken buildings like a whisper. Nira followed the path she had taken before. She found the tower. Ghost was there. He stood near the window and watched the city from afar. When he saw her, he did not reach for his weapon. He knew she would return. She walked to him and told him about the Iron Dawn. She told him about the fire that would fall from the sky. She told him about the plan to end everything. Ghost listened in silence. He did not show fear or anger. He simply nodded once. Then he turned and opened a metal case. Inside were maps, wires, and old data cores. Nira realized he had been ready for this from the start. He had known the council would try to burn the ruins. He had prepared a way to fight back. She told him that if he stayed here alone, he would be surrounded. The army would be too big. The fire would be too strong. Ghost placed his hand on the map and drew a line with his finger. It was a path through the old tunnels under the ruins. He planned to lead the enemy away from the people who still lived here. He was ready to risk everything. Nira stepped closer. She said he did not have to fight alone anymore. He looked at her with those calm eyes behind the mask. She could see the answer in his silence. He had fought alone for so long he did not know another way. But her presence was changing something inside him. Dren watched them quietly. He was a soldier, but he was also a man who had seen too many wars. He understood that sometimes a single moment could change the shape of an entire future. Ghost handed Nira a small transmitter. It was old, but still worked. He showed her how to send a signal through the old channels. He told her to stay away from the battlefield. She shook her head. She said she was not leaving. He did not push her away. For the first time, he accepted that she would stand beside him. The day of the Iron Dawn came. The sky filled with dark ships. The machines moved like a steel storm. The army lined up outside the ruins with weapons ready. Lord Sen gave a speech about victory. He said the empire would rise in glory. His words echoed like iron on stone. Nira stood on the rooftop of the tower with Ghost. She looked at the endless line of soldiers. She felt the wind on her face. She knew this was not just a battle. It was the turning point of everything. Ghost moved like a shadow through the ruins. He set traps in old buildings. He placed charges under bridges. He connected wires through tunnels. Every movement was careful and silent. He was preparing the land itself to fight back. When the first wave entered the ruins, the traps exploded like thunder. Buildings fell and blocked their path. Drones lost their signal in the magnetic fields Ghost had set up. The army tried to move forward, but the city itself turned against them. Lord Sen shouted orders. The soldiers moved with fear in their eyes. Ghost appeared for a moment on a rooftop and fired with perfect aim. Then he disappeared again into the smoke. He was not fighting to win glory. He was fighting to protect what little was left. Nira used the transmitter to send a signal through the old network. Her voice reached small groups of people hiding in the ruins. She told them to move through the tunnels. She guided them away from the fire. She became the light inside the storm. The Emperor watched the battle from the palace screen. He saw how the army moved like a machine, but the land rejected it. He saw the man they called Ghost leading the storm with silence and skill. His heart began to shake. He remembered the night his daughter had been carried. Home by that same man, the council shouted for him to order the fire from the sky. They said if they burned the entire ruins, Ghost would die. The Emperor raised his hand, but his heart did not let him speak the words. On the battlefield, Ghost reached the center of the ruins. Dren stood with him now. They fought side by side as the army closed in. Ghost moved like wind. Dren moved like a shield. Nira sent signal after signal to keep the people safe. The fire ships above prepared to launch their final strike. But before they could release the flames, the Emperor gave a new order. His voice was calm but strong. He said the Iron Dawn was cancelled. He said there would be no fire. The council shouted in shock, but the soldiers obeyed the throne. The sky remained silent. Lord Sin tried to give new orders, but the soldiers had already seen enough. Many of them lowered their weapons. Some of them had families who had whispered Ghost's name with fear and hope. Nira stood at the edge of the tower and looked up at the sky. She felt the wind on her face. Ghost stood beside her. The battle was not over, but the fire had been stopped. A small light had appeared in the darkness. The Emperor left the throne room and walked alone through the night. He came to the ruins with only a few guards. He walked through the broken streets until he found Ghost standing in the center. Nira stood between them. The Emperor looked at the man who had defied his army. Ghost looked back without fear. They were two men from different worlds, but both carried the weight of war. Nira spoke first. She said the Empire did not need more fire. It needed truth. She said Ghost was not their enemy. He was proof that strength could live with honor. The Emperor lowered his head for a moment. Then he spoke slowly. He said the hunt would end. He said the throne would no longer burn the land. The soldiers heard his voice. The dawn broke over the red horizon of the forgotten moon. The air was cold and still. Ash and dust floated above the ground like faint mist. The sound of engines echoed far away as ships from both sides prepared to land. The final hunt for the human soldier, called Ghost, had begun. Ghost stood at the edge of a cliff and looked down at the valley below. The sun rose slowly behind him, spreading light across the rocks. Beside him stood Princess Lorraine, her silver eyes watching the same sky. She said nothing. Words were no longer needed between them. They had shared danger, hunger, and pain. Now they shared purpose. Ghost adjusted his armor and checked his rifle. Every movement was quiet and calm. He was ready. He had seen too many battles to fear another one. What he feared most was losing the only reason he still fought. Lorraine looked at him and asked softly if he still believed peace was possible. He smiled slightly and said, "Peace was always possible, but only if someone was willing to fight for it." She nodded and touched the small crest on her chest, a symbol of her fallen empire. Their scanner showed several groups closing in from different directions. Human soldiers were approaching from the north, while Varian forces were landing from the east. Ghost knew both sides wanted the same thing. They wanted to capture Lorraine and kill him. He also knew that neither side would accept their peace message. So he made his choice. He told Lorraine to head to the old bunker hidden under the rocks. He said there was a transmitter inside that could send a signal far beyond this planet. She could use it to broadcast her final message to both armies before they destroyed everything. Lorraine refused to leave him, but Ghost placed his hand on her shoulder and said that if she stayed, their hope would die with them. She looked into his eyes and saw the truth there. So she went. Ghost turned toward the valley and took position behind a stone wall. He set up small drones and mines around him, forming a defensive circle. He watched the radar and waited. The first human dropship landed on the plain below. Armored soldiers stepped out, their weapons ready. Ghost recognized the insignia on their suits. They were from the same unit he once served in. They were his brothers once. Now they had come to kill him. He took a deep breath and raised his weapon. He did not aim for death. He aimed for delay. He fired warning shots that exploded near them, forcing them to take cover. They returned fire, and the ground shook. Explosions filled the air. Dust covered everything. Ghost moved from rock to rock like a shadow. He used every skill he had learned to stay alive and keep them busy. Meanwhile, the Varian forces arrived from the east. Their ships released bright energy beams that tore through the surface. The human soldiers fought back, and the two sides began attacking each other instead of him. Ghost used that moment to destroy the Varian scout drones with precise shots. He knew that once they realized where he was, both armies would turn on him again. Inside the bunker, Lorraine powered up the ancient transmitter. The system was old, but she managed to repair it using her knowledge of Varian technology. As it came online, she began recording a message to both fleets orbiting the moon. She spoke of the truth she had learned from the human soldier called Ghost. She told them how hatred had blinded both species and how they could end the cycle of war. Her voice was calm but strong. Outside, Ghost fought alone against hundreds. The air burned with energy fire. His armor was cracked, his visor shattered on one side. He kept moving, never staying in one place. His body was bleeding, but his mind stayed clear. Each movement was made with purpose. He thought of Lee Ray and the promise he made to protect her. At last, Human Commander gave the order to target the cliff with heavy bombardment. Ghost looked up and saw the missiles coming. He ran toward the bunker, calling Lee Ray through his comlink. She answered, saying the message was almost ready. Ghost told her to send it now, no matter what happened. She hesitated, then said she believed in him, and pressed the transmit key. The signal flashed through the storm and reached the orbiting ships. Both fleets received the message at the same time. Her words spread through every channel. Officers, soldiers, and even civilians heard the voice of the alien princess who had once been called their enemy. She spoke of the human who had saved her life and shown her mercy when she expected death. She said his courage was proof that peace could exist between their races. For the first time in years, both fleets paused their fire. Back on the surface, the bombardment began. Explosions shook the ground. Rocks fell from the cliffside. Ghost ran toward the bunker, but was thrown to the ground by the blast. His armor alarms screamed warnings. He dragged himself up, smoke filling the air. He saw the entrance collapse behind a wall of fire. He forced his way through the debris and found Lee Ray trapped under fallen stones. Ghost rushed to her side and lifted the rocks with his last strength. Her breathing was weak, but steady. She looked up at him and smiled faintly. She told him that the message had been sent and that maybe now both worlds would listen. Ghost nodded and helped her stand. The bunker walls were cracking. Fire spread through the corridors. He guided her toward the exit, but the heat was too much. The floor shook again as another blast hit nearby. Ghost pushed Lee Ray toward a safe tunnel leading outside and told her to go. She refused to leave him, saying she could not survive without him. He smiled again, the same quiet smile she had seen on the first day they met. He said she had already saved him, even if he never left this place. Before she could answer, he closed the blast door behind her. Lee Ray screamed his name as the metal door locked. She tried to open it, but the control panel was destroyed. On the other side, Ghost walked back toward the main chamber. The structure was falling apart. Fire and smoke surrounded him. He stood tall in the middle of the chaos, his weapon hanging loosely at his side. Through his cracked visor, he could see the stars above through the broken ceiling. He raised his hand and pressed the final switch on his belt. A pulse spread from his armor, deactivating the mines he had placed earlier so Ray could escape safely. Then he looked one last time at the stars and whispered something only the wind could hear. The next explosion consumed the bunker completely. Outside, Lee Ray fell to her knees as the ground shook. Flames burst from the rocks and dust filled the sky. When it cleared, there was only silence. She knew he was gone. She covered her face and wept quietly. Her tears mixed with the ash of the battlefield. Above, the human and Varian fleets remained still, hearing her message echo in their comes. For the first time, neither side fired. Hours later, rescue ships from both fleets landed on the moon. They found Lee Ray alive near the ruins. She refused medical help until she was sure the signal had reached every world. The officers from both sides looked at each other and lowered their weapons. No one dared to speak. They all had heard the message. Days turned into weeks, and the story of Ghost and Lee Ray spread across space. No one ever found the soldier's body. Some said he was vaporized in the explosion. Others believed he escaped and wandered the stars in secret. The truth did not matter anymore. What mattered was the legend he left behind. Years later, When the peace treaty was finally signed between humans and Varians, Princess Lyrae stood before the leaders of both worlds. She spoke again of the man who had saved her and how his heart had changed the course of history. The treaty was named the Ghost Accord in his honor. On the same barren moon where he had fought his last battle, a monument was built. It showed a human soldier standing beside an alien princess, both looking toward the stars. Every year Lyrae returned to that place. She stood before the monument in silence and placed a single white flower at its base. She never forgot his voice, his calm eyes, or his quiet courage. She believed that somewhere beyond the stars, his soul still watched over both their worlds and across generations. Children of both species learned about the soldier named Ghost and the princess who claimed his soul not with power or war but with peace. They learned that true strength was not in destroying enemies, but in finding hope even. When all light seemed lost, the legend lived on. The man called Ghost became a symbol of unity. His story was told in songs, in books, and in the hearts of those who believed that even in the darkest war, one person could change everything. In the end, Ghost was not remembered as a killer, not as a weapon, but as the bridge between two worlds that once hated each other. His name became a whisper of hope, and whenever peace was threatened again, the leaders would look at the monument and remember the man who had fought not for victory, but for love, and who became a legend that no war could ever erase.